Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics and our active accomplices. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and today my guest is Michelle Johnston.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. And you are the second person who's ever done with me. Oh my gosh, who's ever done this with me in person. So I told you the only other person who's ever recorded with me live was Minister Karina Gould.
So cool.
Yes.
You choose to fill. I can't believe I have to go second to that.
I'm sure we're going to have her. She was so lovely to talk with. And I know that you and I are going to have a great chat as well. So before we get started, so in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism, the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. So for people who don't know Michelle, you are, I shouldn't you, because you're sitting like across from me, you are the Director of Communications for Minister Seamus O'Regan, who is the Minister of Labor, so the Federal Minister of Labor. And this morning on my way here, I was trying to think about the first time that we ever our paths crossed. If it was, so we have a mutual friend, your best friend, is now a friend of mine, and she and I connected through Madam Premier via Twitter. But then how did we meet? Was it through her? Through Gabriella?
You know what? I don't even think back to the first time we met, but I just remember starting to see people wearing the clothes.
In Ottawa, or?
It must have been in Toronto when I still lived in Toronto.
Okay.
Maybe it was in Ottawa, but I just remember seeing the clothes and thinking, wow, that's so cool. Where do I find that? And then I looked you up online and started following you and engaging that way. And I had the opportunity to meet you in person last summer when I came out here.
Yeah. And so now it's like our second summer visit. It'd be like an annual thing.
Exactly.
Well, and I also saw you briefly after a pretty momentous occasion, a major accomplishment on the government side, which was, and I'm going to bungle it maybe a little bit, but what did you do that was great? I can't remember now.
I was out here with Minister O'Regan for the CP Rail.
Oh, right. That's what it was.
Dispute negotiations.
Yeah. And we don't hear anything about it anymore because it's been taken care of. So, so I wanted to chat with you today about your involvement in youth politics, and then obviously politics and your role as a director of communications for a federal minister. And if anyone wants to be you and do what you do, what do they do? How do they, what steps do they need to take?
Wow,
that's a lot. I know.
That's a big question.
Yes, do you have 3 hours?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd love to spend 3 hours.
I know.
No,
don't worry.
So beautiful. But such an honor to be here. But maybe I'll start from the very beginning, how I got involved in politics in 2011, actually, which the world has changed so much since then. But I was studying at the University of Toronto. I went there. I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, actually, and I decided to go to U of T because I thought it would, open more doors for me. Everyone says, "Oh, go to Toronto; it's going to open more doors." And I'm like, "Okay, I go to Toronto." I always thought I would get into law. So everyone says, "Study politics, study history." I find myself on this massive campus of just so many people, and when you're studying politics and international relations and history in certain parts of U of T, you find yourself in a lot of classrooms of men and tutorials of men who are very outspoken, would, do a lot of research heading into the class, have big opinions, maybe had familiar connections to politics, like a lot of exposure to this in their life. And it was so intimidating, growing up in Kitchener. I didn't have a lot of exposure to politics in my family. My family was not very political. And all of a sudden I'm like trying to go up against these men in tutorials. So I'm like, oh gosh, where do I fit into all of this? What is my path forward? I just kind of felt like didn't have my place at U of T. And then one of my friends from high school reached out. He had been helping a candidate in Kitchener leading up to the 2011 federal election. He's like, I know you're studying this. I think you might be a good person to get involved in politics. And so I thought, okay, let's do this. Let's explore it. I went online. I Googled like who the Young Liberals were in Toronto and found the Toronto Centre Young Liberals, who emailed me back right away. I have to give credit to them. And it was actually Denise Lamb, who was president at the time, and emailed me back right away and said, we're doing a canvass in Trinity Spadina, the riding at the time, this weekend. Why don't you come? And I went out and I met Christine Innes, who was the federal Liberal candidate in that riding at the time. She had run a couple of times, and maybe not the most ideal election to get involved as a Liberal, because we lost pretty aggressively, but Christine from day one just like, took me under her wing, got to know me, made me feel so welcome. And the thing that I realized about politics immediately was, didn't matter who I was, where I came from, what my parents did, how much money I had, what I was studying. Are you showing up? Are you loyal? Do you have good common sense? Are you ready to work hard? Okay, like we've got a role for you.
We're going to keep you.
We're going to keep you.
Yeah, because you're working really hard and we don't want to lose you.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know that is not everybody's experience. I'm very grateful that from the time I walked in the door, everyone really took me in and paid attention to me and made sure that I felt like I had a home in that party. And so, my exams were done. I just kept coming back out. I canvassed every day. And, obviously we lost that election, but I thought, okay, I really like this environment. I really want to stay involved. I started to get involved with the U of T Liberals and actually became president of the U of T Liberals that summer. And I knew nothing about politics. I just knew I had to keep showing up. So there was a provincial election coming up that fall. Dalton McGuinty running. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to show up everywhere I can. I'm going to go to everything. So whether it was like an office opening in Windsor or a campaign rally in Sudbury, I was like, okay, between, my days off working at the golf course in Kitchener, I would just get on a Greyhound bus and go. And they knew me as the girl that always showed up with a big bag, because I would just go city to city and show up and meet people and go canvassing and bring Young Liberals with me from U of T when I could. And all of a sudden we started to make a name for ourselves as a club. Like we were the ones that were showing up at every office opening, especially in the GTA, and canvassing for everybody. And I thought, okay, we can get out there and canvass for as many candidates as possible this election. Like we can really have an impact. And that started to become my goal, to show what impact our club could have, what impact Young Liberals could have. And, we ended up winning that election. And I met so many people, and I got to know people in the Ontario Liberal Party campaign and office. And it was actually Tiffany Gooch, who was executive director of the Ontario Young Liberals at the time, working at HQ, that despite her very, very busy schedule, would sit me down and just be like, how's it going? Like, who are you making friends with? Who are you dating? What are you interested in? Here's my life. And just made me feel like, even though I had come out of nowhere, like I had a place in this party. And that was just such an incredible experience. And, I finished my final year at U of T and ended up getting an internship at Queen's Park the following summer that, people like Tiffany and Christine Innes fought very hard to make sure that I had that opportunity, and ended up getting hired full time at Queen's Park. So that was the start of my political career. And it was just literally showing up everywhere and showing that I was reliable and willing to work hard, even though I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
I think that's, super inspiring, but also I've never heard of anyone doing exactly what you did before in terms of organizing and then as a campus club, and then being so targeted in your approach and going to campaign to campaign. And honestly, I think it's like a model to replicate in terms of like organization, and then also capacity building, like in every single way, engagement with, the broader campaigns, but also as a club, you probably became a really strong group a network, actually community probably. And to your point, you arrived at the U of T and you didn't really, like it was hard.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I fit in.
But then you met these political people and all of a sudden you had a home.
Exactly.
Like that's really special.
It was really special. And I think what was also really cool was that, not to knock it, but a lot of the history of the club was, students that were studying at Trinity College, which it's sort of known as the more prestigious college at U of T. And, but I have a lot of friends that went there, a lot of friends that were in the Young Liberals from there, and it's nothing against them. But I was from New College, which was a very artsy, diverse, very, very different. A lot of the students going to New College weren't necessarily in politics. They were in gender studies or art history or other domains where people didn't necessarily get involved in politics. So I feel like I kind of came at it from a different perspective with a different group of people that I was recruiting from for the club, which was really cool at the time. And I'm really glad that you brought up capacity building, because I think that's, when I think back to my time in the Young Liberals, it's something I thought a lot about. And that's something I thought a lot about between elections and leading up to elections. So, in my time in the Young Liberals, I ended up running for Ontario Young Liberal president and serving as president heading into the 2014 election, which was Kathleen Wynne's big majority win election. And I was so grateful that I had a window, not just a window in, but a seat at the table when we were planning for that election. So Pat Sorbera was an amazing mentor and just made sure that it wasn't, not in a token way, like, oh, what did the youth think too? I was in every room, every planning session, and was able to think strategically about all the ridings across the province and how do we make sure that we have Young Liberal capacity in every single one, not just so that we have people to go canvass in every riding, but so that we have people to help run campaigns. And so we spent a lot of time going around the province, training people, bring senior people from the party to train Young Liberals in how to be a canvas chair, how to be a candidate's aide, how to think strategically about communications in campaign, all these roles that you wouldn't typically think about youth doing, because you're like, okay, youth are going to recruit other youth, they're going to show up in canvas, and that's a really key part of campaigning, don't get me wrong. But when you bring in young and diverse voices into running a campaign, you completely change how the campaigns run and how accessible it is to people and so on and so forth. So when our government fell and we went into a campaign that year, I'd be at HQ and they'd be like, oh, we need a candidate's aide in that riding. We need a campaign manager up in this riding in the north. We need a canvas chair in this riding. And I'd look at my spreadsheet and I'd get on the phone and I'd call someone who was studying at Brock or Waterloo or the University of Windsor and say, what are you doing for the summer? Do you want to be a candidate's aide for the next month? And there they'd go. And, sometimes it was on a volunteer basis. Sometimes it was a paid role, but we kind of spread out that way, which was a little bit untraditional because, in the past, the approach was pool the Young Liberals together, put them on buses, tour them around the province, do big rallies and canvasses. And that can be really effective too. But I thought, why not give Young Liberals an opportunity on the ground to impact and influence these campaigns, and they can recruit on the ground too. So there were definitely some points in time where people would say, well, can't we just get 200 Young Liberals in this rally or in this room? And we did do one big campaign rally with Kathleen Wynne during the campaign. That was a cool experience. But I'd say, we don't have all these people that are mobile because they're on the ground influencing these campaigns. And I just felt really, really strong about that. And I was glad that all the people I was working with and all the mentors that I had supported that approach, because it meant that we were building this pipeline of talent. A lot of those people went on to work at Queen's Park and were intern at Queen's Park and were able just to have so much more of an impact on the ground in that campaign that we ended up winning.
Well, and careers in politics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, using someone as like an occasional like door knocker or canvasser, and you call them only when you need them versus, that capacity building. And then that, then they continue to have roles and campaigns. They feel valued. They're, contributing, like it's a win, 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 win. And then especially on the gender side and diversity side, because to your point earlier about, being in those poli-sci classrooms, I mean, I worked in politics too, and was so male dominated. And so there has to be, that has to change. And this is part of that change. Because, I didn't have any family connections to politics either. It's, I think, a message that people need to hear, especially if you don't come from political families or families that, like neither of my parents graduated from university, for example. Like this wasn't something that was in my realm. It wasn't, we didn't talk about politics. Like I was a really unusual kid because like I would, but like no one else, everyone thought I was like strange and really odd as a child. But how do you get people to see that this is a pathway and that there is a possibility, but also the best way to get involved is simply just by starting. So, finding whoever you're ideologically aligned with and showing up. Like that's as low barrier as it is. You don't need to buy a ticket to, a $500 fundraising event to try and meet, the one person, that you need to think you need to meet. Is literally just going to a campaign office and saying, hi, my name is Sarah, and I'd like to get involved.
Exactly. And like, listen, there are many barriers in politics along the way, and in any industry there's barriers, but I cannot emphasize the point you just made enough. Just showing up on a campaign. I have seen so many great people, and I've tried to help so many great people in the campaigns that I've managed, that just show up on a campaign and are reliable. I'm like, in that 30-day period, which, granted feels like a year long.
Yes, it does.
Someone can go from meeting you on day one to like co-managing the campaign on day 30, depending on the structure of the campaign and how many people you have. Sometimes the campaign manager is only full-time staff, or you might have one or two other people. So if someone's like, I'm done my exams for the year, I've got a few weeks before I start my full-time job, I'm just going to show up. Well, maybe you'll have a full-time job on the campaign by the end. Like it's that low barrier.
Well, so my 2015 experience was, we had been living in Calgary for a couple of years. I hadn't done I hadn't done anything really politically for a couple of years. And so the 2015 election, I emailed someone that I used to work with in BC politics who was working on the federal Liberal campaign. And I've never talked about this before, but actually at the time, it might have lapsed, but I had been a member of the Federal Conservative Party.
Okay.
Yes. So I've been a member of the Federal Conservatives, and I've been a member of the Federal Liberals, which is very telling because my political background is a BC Liberal, which is a coalition of Federal Liberals and Federal Conservatives. So it makes sense that at least to me, and maybe some who are listening, and then others definitely will be. But that election was really pivotal for me because of everything. I was like, I don't see myself within the Conservative Party any longer. The policies that they were putting out, specifically like the tip line, and they were just going in a direction that was fundamentally at odds with who I am and what I believe in.
Right.
And so I reached out to this person who was working in Ottawa that used to work with me in BC, and was like, hi, if you were to get involved in a campaign, or tell me, who do you think I should volunteer my time with in Calgary in this election? And he gave me a few suggestions, and I was like, there was this one person on the list that I had never heard of, and his name was Matt Grant. He was running in the riding of Calgary Confederation. By that time, I had a rule where, a personal rule, which was that I would never give my time to someone who I didn't believe in.
Right.
So I emailed or messaged, I'm not sure actually, and said, like, hi, I'd like to potentially get involved, but I'd like to meet with you first. And he said, yes.
Great.
So we had coffee, and immediately, like, I was in. And then literally he was like, would you, because the coffee shop was across the street from the campaign office. He was like, do you want to come to the campaign office and meet everyone? And I was like, sure. And then we get to the office and he's introducing me to everyone. And then he said, hey, we're having a campaign meeting tonight. Can you stay? And I said, like, unfortunately, no, I can't right now. But I'll come to the next one. And then I, took over all of his social media. I was at the campaign office every day. That became like, I met so many people that way. And up until that point, I wasn't in university, but I felt like lost in Calgary. And that was kind of like the first place where I felt like I was at home in a political sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that led to me joining that riding association and going to my first federal liberal convention and still being on the riding association. Anyways, it was like, yeah.
I love that. That's how it happens.
It does.
Right?
That is how it happens. Like, and you literally just have to make that initial outreach, right? And whatever that looks like. So, and now I'm not a member of any political party, which is just fine. Especially because in Alberta on the provincial side, things are just very different than what I left in BC. So
it's very different.
Yes,
very different. And I think you do a great job of, looking at each party for what they offer, and there's pros and cons of each. And, I think generally as a society, we're kind of moving away from partisanism. Wow, losing my words here. But even the shift we're seeing in some of the political leaders and some of the populist movements, like people are less blindly partisan, I think, and looking for leaders that align with their values more than ever, more than just parties that align with their values. It's a really interesting time.
It is. Well, especially in a, we're not post-COVID, but in a post-2020, still COVID evolving world, what people are looking for, how they're looking for it, and what they identify with is that's very interesting. Also on the back of, Donald Trump thankfully losing office in the United States. But there are so many things at play right now globally and domestically that it's an interesting time to be an observer, but also it's not just observations. It's actually happening to us. Like, this is very real.
It's very real. We're seeing so many shifts. And I think people really, in a very intense way, for better or for worse, saw the involvement of government in their lives and the importance of government's role in their lives during COVID and how much they rely on that. As I said, for better or for worse, because there were some good and some not so great examples of that. But I think it's really shifted people's thinking when it comes to elections and government and where they align.
Definitely. So also, I think it's been a time specifically because of what's happened in the States around Roe versus Wade. But I think there are a lot of people who are especially, I think, a very pivotal moment was, the murder of George Floyd, obviously. And then there have been people are paying more attention, which is really good. What I want people to think about is that it shouldn't take being touched by something to care, like to give a damn about what's happening in the world, because that's the height of privilege, that you can just watch things happen in the world and be like, oh, it's not my problem. It's not my issue. It doesn't matter because it's not impacting me. You don't know it is, but also we do have to care about people who we don't know. And we have to care about them a lot, actually, because they matter. Everyone should matter, whether you know them or not. But anyways, that's like, welcome to my messy head and all of the things that I'm thinking about. But So now in your role as Director of Communications for Minister O'Regan, he's so interesting. And I mean, I think Canadians know him best as being like the former host of Canada AM.
Mhm.
And then he made the jump to politics, but he's also from Newfoundland
And Labrador.
Of course. You can't say one without the other. And now he's had a few roles, but now he's in labor, and it seems to really suit him.
I think if you look back at all of his portfolios, you can see his people-centered approach to all of it. And, he likes to joke about that being the reason why he landed the job at Labor, because he's focused on people. So whether you're talking about, a just transition and making sure that that's worker-led, or making sure that as we're growing the economy, that we're focused on people, or creating jobs that we're focused on people, and it's really important to think about it from the business perspective as well, because you want this to be a competitive jurisdiction, and you want to attract investment and have the people that create the jobs, but you got to make sure they're good jobs too. And so that's the perspective he comes at it from. And, he's an incredible communicator. So it makes my job a lot easier too.
Yeah, especially, well, obviously his media background, but that would be, I think working with any candidate or any politician who has a background in communications would be, and I never had that opportunity, would be really fascinating. It would be, I can see the pros and cons actually, because they can probably see the pros and cons of everything and would definitely be opinionated, but it would be a really interesting dynamic.
It is, but I've learned so much from him. I learned so much from Catherine McKenna when I worked for her most recently, both incredible communicators with a very particular style and specific expectations. But, in the last, I came on the Hill in November of 2020 when I made the jump to federal politics. And in that period of time, I've just learned so much in terms of communication. It's incredible. And I have them to thank, because they're such great communicators. And as much as they're teaching you, they're still respecting what you bring to the table, and still taking your advice as well. So it's really, really rewarding.
Yeah, Catherine McKenna is, she's still very good at communications, at telling stories. Obviously now, her role as Minister of Environment, but then now in her new role, which is also related to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I was thinking back to, when I started in politics, like in 2007, when I worked in the BC legislature, not every politician, for example, used Twitter. Like Twitter was so new. And we in the legislature at that time, in ministers' offices, there was communications people on the caucus side to help them as ministers, as MLAs. Then we had a public affairs bureau, now no longer called that. Now it's called Government Communications and Public Engagement, which is very governmenty. And so on the bureaucracy side, and then we would do it as off the side. It would be like, it was just a part of our jobs. But now ministers have social media people, like dedicated social media people. Like the world has grown in leaps and bounds. And if you're not using technology and you're not using social media, then no, elections aren't won on Twitter, but you still need to be on Twitter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something I've been thinking a lot about in this job, particularly. In both roles with Minister McKenna and Minister O'Regan, I learned a lot about communicating on social media, but just watching that evolution from when I first got involved in politics, and it was kind of there, but it was like a nice to do. And then when I worked at Queen's Park, it was like, okay, we need to do this, but it wasn't as timely. Like there was still news breaking on Twitter for sure, but it was a little bit like, okay, we did that event this morning, this afternoon, we'll post a photo and a little description. And then
it wasn't immediate.
It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't necessary. Yeah. And it was off the side of the desk. And then, fast forward to the roles I've held most recently, when I came to work for Minister McKenna, there was a dedicated social media person, but it's even grown beyond just social media. It's like they are a full digital strategist. So they might be doing photography, they might be doing videography, they might be self-teaching, like self-learning different video editing skills and how to throw together some B-roll with a voiceover and put out cool videos. Or now we're seeing the emergence of reels and politicians using more reels, less so on TikTok, I think at this point, but still the reels on Instagram. And, especially during COVID and everybody being online, that need to like constantly feed the beast, if you will, with content has just grown so much. So now it's like, okay, you go from having this on the side of someone's desk to having a dedicated social media person to having a digital strategist. Maybe you even need a digital strategist and a junior social media person, because you're talking about so many different platforms. And beyond that, which is like this part I think is the coolest for me in my role, is that Twitter at times has become the primary or the first form of communication, especially when I've been supporting Minister O'Regan on the comms around labor disputes or some really fast moving issues. Putting together a press release, putting together a statement that has to track through a lot of approvals, it has a role to play, don't get me wrong, but it takes time. And you might have to announce something at like 2:00 in the morning and you got to get it out immediately. So, during the CP rail labor dispute, I would, we'd get the tweet out on Twitter. I would immediately send that tweet to all the journalists that were following, and that would be our public statement. That would be our public communication. So, it's gone from that like kind of nice to do thing to this is the first place we're announcing something when it's moving quickly. Obviously, there are so many different levels of communication. And if you're planning a big announcement, you're probably not going to do it on Twitter first. But it's been a very fascinating and useful tool in those moments.
Yeah. I'm going to take a moment to, so yeah, like we did back in the day, because it was a while ago now, but like we would, there was nothing like that. And so, I'm thinking to one minister I worked for specifically. He was a brand new MLA. He had the background in the file, which was agriculture, which was actually my dream ministry. As a former 4-H member. And then, he wasn't even on Twitter, but then wearing all of those hats. Video was not a thing, thank goodness. Well, was a thing, but only on YouTube.
Okay.
That was like, there was no one was doing any video. And then, for example, I can remember we went to one blueberry farm and it was like, I'm going to take a picture of you in this, row of blueberry bushes. And then one of my, claims to fame in life is that one of the photos I took became a cover photo of BC Blueberry Grower magazine. I know everyone should know about this. Obviously, it should be on my resume. It's not. But like, those are the photo taker, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And now there are people for each role and I'm very envious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Although there are definitely moments of like, you're doing a little bit of everything, especially when you're on tour.
Yeah.
We just toured a couple of weeks ago in Southern Ontario. And it's like, you're taking the photos and then you're jumping in the car, Bluetoothing the photos to your phone, drafting the tweet, grabbing the tags, getting approval on the tweet, getting it out. And 15 minutes later, you're at the next event.
And doing it all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when the tour concludes, you're making a video.
Yeah.
Of everything, of all of the content, and you're repurposing it. And the social media side of things is, and I think there's still a very common kind of thought that it's, something that only it's absolutely critical now because, and perhaps we can see there are some politicians in Canadian politics right now who are using video, for example, very effectively.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't create, then you're leaving a void, and then you're letting the other side or whoever it is, have that. So
yeah, it's definitely it's constantly changing and being used in
Mhm.
new and innovative and interesting ways to pump up certain rhetoric. But, you got to fill the void. But I think it's also how you're reaching not just your audience, but like everybody in different segments of the population, different communities. I mean, during COVID, during the height of COVID, I should say, because we're still in it, we didn't have the ability to go into certain communities on the ground and have the face-to-face conversations that are so critical from the perspective of informing policymaking. So how are you reaching those audiences? How are you looking across different platforms and reaching out to those people so that government's accessible to them?
Yeah.
I mean, we're even seeing the emergence of, maybe influencers is the right word, but even just people within firms or politics, like on TikTok, making videos that break down government policy. Like, okay, the government went out with this is what it means. Here's how it's going to impact you. And I think it's made the whole structure so much more accessible to people, right?
And it should be. Also, but I would point out that it's in some ways, like I think it's amazing that there are, people in the world of social media who can do that. But I also think that points to a missed opportunity on the side of politicians to be doing it in the same way, like that they're filling a gap that exists. Maybe there shouldn't be that gap because it's government who should be, finding new ways of communicating. I'm not saying that those political quote unquote influencers should, there's not a role for them. There absolutely is, especially on the comedic side, because like we all need, a moment to just kind of laugh. But, they're telling the story for government because government isn't. So that's just one of my observations.
No, it's a fair critique of the whole system, I think. And it's actually something I've been thinking a lot about. Because I follow American politics and I follow a lot of the staff that work in digital roles in the US and communications roles, because they're always doing cool and innovative things. And something I notice a lot more in the US is that they tap staff to be communicating these things. I mean, probably more at the highest level, but not just like the formal press sec briefings. It's like the associate press secs going and doing TV interviews to break down, because if you think about the president's time, obviously it's very limited. He can't be in every forum and every platform breaking these things down. So they tap, other people on the team to do that. So I think a lot about it from that perspective. And it's like, where is the balance between making sure that voice, the person explaining those things, is the person that's elected to do that and accountable for that. But also recognizing that their time is so limited. So how do you best use their time to be getting into those
in front of those audiences,
yeah. Right? And
well, I think the word they use is like a delegate, right? So like they delegate people to go on like different talk shows, and then they're like then they put out the talking points, and then it ends up being about the policy, but it's not the person who made the policy who's delivering the talking points. So then you're kind of sharing, the star factor, or the, could either be very good or very bad, to be honest, depending on what's going on. And we've seen here in Alberta what not to do in terms of staff taking a very active and strong role on social media, being extremely combative with ordinary citizens on Twitter in particular, and criticizing and critiquing people. So that's like a lesson in what not to do. So it's interesting. Yeah, that is a really fascinating conversation, because I do think that there is kind of like a middle ground, but there needs to be tight constraints and understandings around what the role is, how you use that power, and how it should be a force of good and not, being like, hey, at cat person 1, 2, 3, 4, like, you don't know what you're talking about, that kind of thing. That's not where it should go.
No,
yeah,
not at all. And I think that's sort of the other end of the extreme, and people see that and they're like, oh, they're like, staff need to be behind the scenes. And I think you're right. It's a middle ground. It had like, no matter what, you're an extension of the person that you work for, even if you're not out in a formal role talking about things. If I post something on Twitter, if I'm, doing this podcast is a more formal example, but if I'm out anywhere in the world, I'm an extension of the minister and I have to behave accordingly, no matter what I'm doing.
And that's what we were told as staffers. When I started working, even in caucus, we were told, don't do anything that you don't want to see on the front page of the newspaper. And that was a very regular and repeated message at that time. And that has obviously evolved. I don't know if they still tell BC Liberal staffers that, or if it happened, I'm not sure. But we were told, the understanding was, you are a reflection ultimately of if something happens, they're going to say, whatever position you have, or they'll inflate it and be like, senior government's, staff are embroiled in X, Y, Z, right? And it's like, it doesn't even matter if it's really, it's salacious and it sells. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in Ottawa, it's on a whole new level, not in terms of the direction, but in terms of staff's lives just being under a microscope. Sometimes in hilarious ways and sometimes not so much. But there's, I don't know if you follow Politico, but Politico has what they call political playbook.
Yes.
And they send it out at 6 a.m. every morning, and they do an American one and an Ottawa focused one. And it's amazing because it's like everything you need to know happening in Ottawa for the day, every committee meeting, every announcement, every hot topic, and who's been commenting on it. But there's also like a spotted section. It could be like, like staffer to this person, like cooking Italian, and a link to their Twitter posting their dinner, which is funny, but it's also like, you got to remember that
maybe it's not cooking Italian food on Twitter. It could be something else.
Well, I'm not going to knock people for posting about their dinner.
No, they should.
I post about my workouts all the time.
Yeah.
But it's just a reminder.
It could be something else that's not,
about that person's life, right?
Or it could be negative.
Oh, right.
Like I know.
It could be reporting.
I'm happy. I love seeing your workout photos, and I hope people are making home cooked Italian meals because they don't have a lot of time, and I want them to be eating healthy and home cooked meals and exercising and taking time for their mental health. I want all of those things for every political staffer everywhere. It's on the negative side. Yeah. Something more,
If you post a controversial opinion,
exactly.
someone's going to write about it.
Right?
Yeah,
yes.
You can pretty much guarantee that.
Yeah.
In Ottawa. So you have to be mindful. Yeah.
Well, being mindful of time as well. Maybe we should leave things there for today, but I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed talking with you and getting to know you, and your visits to Calgary when they happened last year. And it's so exciting to see what you're doing and to hear your story, especially about the youth part. It's I hope that people are inspired by that.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. And thank you so much for what you're doing for women, not just in Canada, but I think globally. Fashion is political. And everywhere I go wearing your clothes, because my wardrobe has expanded so much, they're like, oh, I just want to see what your shirt says. I found this a lot when I was out in St. John's staffing the minister. People are like, oh my God, where did you get that? Where can I find it? And, people want to engage. They want to feel seen in this space. And you put a lot of effort into making sure those people feel seen and heard. So thank you for everything you do.
You're very welcome. And, it really started with thinking about how creating a message that would speak to people through the Woman's Place design, is in council chambers, legislature, and then thinking I've never had something in my wardrobe that, spoke to my, about women in politics and about, the need for change. And so that's how it started. And I did it because I thought there would be more women who would want that same message. And it's been overwhelming and extremely touching and hard for me to really process at times, that message does resonate with others. So thank you for being such an amazing person in politics, and for loving Madam Premier, and for being a very serious political woman. Like the shirt you're wearing right now. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, keep it up.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.